Hi, everybody. My name is Alessio Ponzio. I'm an assistant professor in modern European history and history of gender and sexuality at the University of Saskatchewan. And from this year, 2023, I'm working together with Miriam Bensley-Main to revamp 2S LGBTQIA plus History Month Canada on a national level. So I thought it was a great idea to celebrate the month talking with Professor Alexandra, but maybe Alex is good, Ketchum, from McGill University about her latest book, Ingredients for Revolution, A History of American Feminist Restaurants, Cafes, and Coffeehouses. The book was published by Concordia University Press in 2022. And I hope maybe later, Alex, you can tell us also about the cover, if you can show it again, to our,
Yeah, sure.
audience. So Alex, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my book and to speak with all of you. So my name's Alex Ketchum. My pronouns are she, her. I am a assistant professor at McGill University at the Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies. Prior to that, I was a faculty lecturer for 5 years in a non-tenure track position. And it was during that position I wrote this book. I'm originally from Southern California, but I haven't been living there since 2008, and I've been in Montreal or Tiohtià:ke for the last 11 years.
And can you tell us what is the genesis of this book? I mean, does it relate to other works of yours or is it completely different?
For sure, yeah. So Ingredients for Revolution is based off of my doctoral work. So for folks who have seen other stuff I've written, I wrote another book in between the end of my PhD in 2018 and Ingredients for Revolution. But this is a history of feminist restaurants, cafes, and coffee houses from 1972 to present, or really till 2022 when the book came out. And my doctoral work was on feminist restaurants, cafes, and coffee houses in the US and Canada from 1972 to 1989. So I expanded the scope but focused on a single national context for the book itself, but there's earlier roots of this work. In my undergrad, I was majoring in feminist studies at Wesleyan University, taking a lot of history courses, and I was really involved with the food politics scene. I ran the schools, I co-organized the school's organic farm, Long Lane. I founded a food politics living community, which still exists today, called Farmhouse. And I wanted to bring together my interests in food politics and feminist work, especially around these questions of cooking, gendered labor in the kitchen, and so forth. And while I was working on my honors undergrad thesis project, a friend mentioned that there's this feminist restaurant called Bloodroot, feminist vegetarian restaurant and bookstore located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is about 40 minutes from Middletown, where I was living. And so I visited it and I was just immediately blown away. So in that undergrad work, I wrote a little bit about Bloodroot and a little bit about Bread and Roses, which was a feminist restaurant located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. When I was applying for graduate school, I did my master's on Canadian feminist restaurants, really focusing on kind of Ontario and Quebec, and then I expanded it for my PhD. So I worked on this project in different forms for 12 years. And during that time, I also was thinking a lot about queer feminist spaces, because most of these feminist restaurants were started by lesbians or women who today might consider themselves as queer women. And I was thinking about queer food, food studies, food history more generally.
And, when you are talking to scholars, they're always ask you, can you tell me in a couple of minutes, what is the main argument of your book? And everybody's like, oh, well, so what would you say? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's a couple of main arguments. One is that looking at this history is really useful when we're thinking about how it's possible to start a feminist business today, so that it's not a new concept to care about people, profit, and place, and that there have been institutions since the 70s that have been doing this kind of work. I'd say the other arguments have to do with the fact that these spaces, even for the ones that only existed for a short amount of time, weren't failures. Instead, they were really amazing for creating community, for thinking through what it meant to create queer and feminist space. I mean, they didn't necessarily use the word queer for their space, but to create this kind of feminist space, embodying their community values through the principles of their business, while dealing with that contradiction of how do you live out your values under a capitalist society. And that it can be really difficult to balance all of these things. So one of the things I'm most proud of in the book was something that seems kind of simple when I articulate it now, but I have this diagram of a triangle in it, in which it talks about how these restaurant owners and founders and people working in these feminist spaces tried to balance making sure that the farm workers were paid properly for the produce that they were producing, and that they were in solidarity with farm worker movements, and that they want ingredients to be local and seasonal. That was the case for many in the spaces. While at the same time, they wanted to make sure that their customers could actually afford to be in this space. So they would have sliding scale dishes, for example, or someone could order a cup of tea and sit there for hours. But at the same time, they're trying to be really aware of the fact that many of the people coming to these spaces were perhaps working class lesbians who had not as much disposable income to spend at a restaurant, but they also needed to make enough profit in order to support the space, because they also wanted to make sure that the women working in that space, who are oftentimes trying to work in a business where they could live as out lesbians, that they could make enough money to support their bills. So trying to balance those three things was really difficult. But I think looking at the ways they tried to navigate that is also really important for looking at what businesses and different kind of community spaces can do today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That was very fascinating and super clear. So thank you so much. And what is your, the other question that everybody asks, what is your archive? So where did you collect all your sources?
Yeah, for sure. So I love talking about methods, and it's a little bit complicated with this book, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I had to use a mixed methods approach because I wanted to have case studies in this book, which I do, but I also wanted to show how many of these feminist restaurants, cafes, and coffee houses there were. And there had never been a directory or a list made of them, so I had to create my own. And then I used this to create a kind of mapping project as well. So I did this through a variety of means. Part of it was I looked through lesbian travel guides and women's travel guides and tried to find all of the different restaurants listed. I went through thousands of issues of different lesbian and feminist periodicals, both to look at spaces that were featured in articles, such as things like new restaurant opening. I also looked at advertisement sections. Most archives don't have most feminist archives and queer archives don't have a restaurant section. Instead, I would try to go through ephemera collections and look for business cards or events flyers. Also, I contacted every queer LGBTQ archive I could find that was listed in the SAA, so the Society of American Archivists Lavender Guide, Lavender Legacy Guide, which was last updated in 2012, to see if they had any materials that might not have been cataloged or listed. I also was able to find specific archival materials for places like Bloodroot, because that restaurant still exists today. It was founded in 1977, but continues to operate. I did interviews, and I used kind of a snowball method where people would introduce me to someone else, as well as trying to track down someone's information because they might have a LinkedIn page. I also posted on different Facebook groups that were targeted at older lesbians and kind of shared findings. There's also some Facebook groups that are kind of remembrance pages of different feminist restaurants. So I did that. And then in 2013, I had launched a website with my initial findings, and I shared the URL with lots of folks and said, please tell me if I'm missing spaces. I want to hear from you. So I was able to get input from the public. I originally had a map where people could drop a pin, but no one actually wanted to do that. They just wanted to send me an email. So I got rid of that map. But I continue to update the directory today. So even though this book was published in 2022, I usually end up adding something new once a month or so, because someone will read the book or they'll see an article about it, or find something else of mine, and they're like, oh, my mom ran a space in 1976, so it's pretty great. And the other kind of challenge with this project methodologically, so to back up, I looked at, I think it was 19 different archives, mostly in-person materials, but there are also some digitized materials. But in addition to that, I also, what was I going to say else about archives? I now lost my train of thought. Anyways, yeah, I continue to add stuff to it today. So if anyone's listening to this and they find something new, please let me know. I think it's the whole point of all of the work that I do is I want other people to take what I've done and build on it, add on it, make it better. So now folks who are interested in maybe writing a history of feminist restaurants in Massachusetts or in South Carolina, they can look at what I have and then build upon it. Oh, now I remember what I was going to say. The other kind of challenge with methods was also terminology of how I was defining what is a feminist restaurant, what I was going to include, what I was going to exclude. I didn't want to be prescriptive from my point of view of I'm like saying, this is what feminism is, but I was interested in what the people who founded these spaces defined feminism as. So in terms of like, if they called it a feminist restaurant in their title, like Bloodroot did, where literally the name of the restaurant is Bloodroot Feminist Vegetarian Restaurant and Bookstore, or if they did in their advertising or in interviews. So that's how it's defined. So there are social justice spaces that you might not see listed in the directory because they weren't explicitly using the term feminism for the work they were doing.
So it almost seems like this job, I mean, this work can be the beginning of something even bigger. I mean, it's like the creation of this kind of map that in theory is endless, and you can add all those new people who might be interested in being focusing on a specific area or a specific state. So I think that basically you launch something with this book, hoping also that other people are going to follow your path and trying to produce an even bigger, history, very localized, maybe.
Definitely. And like one thing I have in the appendix is I did kind of sample maps of if you looked in one city during 1 year, all of the different kinds of spaces, if you wanted to look at other kinds of businesses like bookstores and credit unions and stuff like that. There are some amazing mapping projects that are also happening. So Amanda Reagan and Eric Gonzaba have been using the Dameron's guides, the male traveler guides, kind of gay men's guides to do just a larger mapping project of every listing in every edition. And then Annalise Hines and, oh my gosh, I'll think of his name in a second. Oh my gosh, I feel so bad. But they've been working with Eric and Amanda in order to do another mapping project looking at the Gaia's Guide. So I had used Gaia's Guides for my book and I've written some articles about it. And so they're now taking all the editions and doing this kind of quantitative approach as well. So yeah, so I'm hoping other people can build on that.
Yeah. And one question that I have, before moving towards my final two questions is about really the cover of the book. Right. If you can show it again, and if you can tell us, what is behind that, or if there is a story behind that.
Definitely. And also, sorry, Cameron Blevins. It's Annalise Hines and Cameron Blevins are doing the guys now. Okay. So yeah. So anyways, check out their amazing work. Okay. So the cover so I didn't draw the cover for folks who haven't published yet. Oftentimes like presses work with different designers, but I did have kind of some specific ideas behind it. But Bloodroot Feminist Vegetarian Restaurant in Bridgeport has published numerous vegetarian and vegan cookbooks where they really talked about how they view feminist food. And it's tied to their identity as lesbians and their identity as women. And they see it as very seasonal. And the first one came out in 1980 and it's called The Political Palette. And on it, it uses similar font to the cover. It's very similar. And then it has an illustration of the bloodroot plant. And so the designer that Concordia Press was working with took inspiration from that cover but instead drew a beetroot because I was thinking like connections like beetroot, bloodroot. But actually when I first saw the cover, I thought it was a little radish, which for me was very fitting because I see the work that feminist restaurants did in creating lesbian space and creating really political space in which to eat and gather around food as radical in a way, but also trying to operate within a system. So for me, what they were doing was rad-ish. So it's kind of a pun for me. So yeah, but I was really specific that I wanted the cover to be a lavender color because that's oftentimes a color to represent lesbian culture. And also for folks who don't know, Betty Friedan in the National Organization for Women now at the kind of large branch called lesbians the lavender menace within the feminist movement as kind of ruining this politics of respectability. So that's why it's lavender.
And
Yeah.
also a great color. My God, lavender purple are my favorite color. So that's great. And, I know that you are, among other things, a historian that really is very interested in public history, right? So why do you think public history matters?
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes I call it public history, sometimes I call it public scholarship because I kind of work in an interdisciplinary way. Or, to use kind of funding bodies terms, research knowledge mobilization. But I think all of these things are really important for scholars who are in the academy to be part of, because for a variety of reasons. One, many of us, our funding comes from taxpayers. And so I think like the public at large should be able to have access to that research. I also think while there is merit in having academic journal articles that a small group of your peers, they're also experts, read, I think there can be value in that. But we have the ability to inform larger conversations. We can actually participate in kind of what conversations are happening, for example, for those of us who are queer historians and doing queer history, to actually share this information with people who want to learn more about their history. I don't want my stuff to stay behind a paywall. I want people to be able to have access for it. So that being said, like my book is also available open access. And I also wrote another book called Engage in Public Scholarship, ! A guidebook on feminist and accessible communication, which was also published by Concordia University Press in 2022 and is also available open access. And it has a variety of so the first part of the book kind of talks about why this is so important, what we mean by accessible, what kind of language we're using, what kind of communities we're trying to reach when we're thinking about internet access, just the work done by amazing disability scholars, activists, and artists. And the second part is a series of toolkits. So if you want to think about creating a podcast or films or writing op-eds or working with journalists or blog posts or creating an app for people's phones to create art and work with cartoonists, all these different kinds of strategies. So you don't have to like read it in order. I really want to make these things accessible for scholars to then make their work more accessible for the public at large. I know many universities say that they care about accessible scholarship, but it's not always valued in terms of hiring or promotion. And I know that being asked to do something else when you're already really tired and exhausted as a scholar, when we're asked to do so many things with teaching and service and research, can seem like, oh, now you're telling me to do something more. But for me, this is what drives and motivates everything that I do. I don't know, the kind of impact even a blog post sometimes can make in shaping a conversation, shaping policy, when government employees aren't able to oftentimes read things that are behind a paywall in a journal. It's something that I find really important to my own mission statement as a human being, but I also want to help people know help them learn the skills that they need to do this work.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree, because for me, it's I always say it's very important to go beyond the famous ivory tower. It's very important to talk to people. And this is why, we launched in Italy LGBT History Month, and how, we're trying to revamp, History Month Canada, because it's a way in general to bring, this type of conversation to people that maybe would not think about this. And even a video or a blog or something that can be easily listened to or read or can be read can make a difference. So this is why I think
Definitely.
it's very important to be accessible and clear and talk to the people, so that then maybe we can make a real difference, I guess. And so what is next, Alex? Because I know, are you working on books? You wrote many books, but are you working on new books? I know there is a conference that maybe is going on soon. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I kind of split my research time between, I do a bunch of stuff kind of around queer and feminist food, and then a bunch of stuff around kind of queer and feminist tech. So if you think it's weird, I'm talking about tech projects and food projects, it's kind of, I split the two. It's easier to get funding for my tech scholarship than for my food scholarship. So that's kind of why there's the divide. So yeah, something I'm really excited about is Megan, Elias, and from Boston University's Food Studies program and Gastronomy program, and I are co-organizing a conference that's happening April 27th and April 28th at Boston University on queer food. So this is a conference that's open to scholars, activists, artists, journalists, and there are in-person and virtual opportunities to participate. We've kept the registration fee. It's going to be quite low at $45. And if you're in person, that's going to like pay for mostly food. So it's going to be a set of workshops, panels, different kinds of presentations. We're going to have shared food where actually queer food producers will be talking about the food that they've made and how it relates to their identity and the work they do while we're actually eating it. So there's this kind of embodied connection. From that conference, we're hoping to have a series of publications, which I want to talk about more later, but I have to keep some of it kind of hush-hush right now. But then I'm also but one of the publications that will come out of it, that's more of an informal publication, is we're going to create a queer food conference community cookbook where everyone who participates in the conference will be invited to submit a recipe and write a recipe head note explaining like how that recipe connects to their ideas of queer food. So that will be one of the things, as well as other kinds of publications off of the conference. But I'm also working right now on a monograph talking about queer internet history. So really focusing on basically early 1990s to early 2000s primarily, and looking how there were different organizations that helped queer organizations move online, create websites, learning how to do those skills. So my research for that book is essentially done, and I'm hoping to finish writing it by August. That's like my goal. So we'll see if that all happens. I've got a lot on my plate this year, but I'm really excited. And then for folks who enjoy watching online events, even if you're not in Montreal, I am continuing to organize Disrupting Disruptions, the Feminist Accessible Publishing, Communications, and Technology Speaker and Workshop Series. So there's already been 79 events. Today's the 80th event, I believe. And they're free, they're open to the public. We hire human captioners to make them more accessible. In-person events also have a virtual option almost every time. And we put the recordings online at disruptingdisruptions.com under the video tag. So it's disruptingdisruptions.com. Yeah, so I hope folks can check out those projects, and I try and make an open access or free version in some form of everything that I do, so people can have access to this queer feminist history.
Alex, it was such a great pleasure to talk to you today, and you are super clear, super informative, and I hope that many people are going to see what you have produced so far. They're going to buy your books or read your books, online. But I think that you're doing very important work, and so I really want to thank you also to take the time to have this conversation with me today. So really, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all your work around 2S LGBTQIA History Month. So it's really exciting, and I hope people take advantage of all of the amazing conferences, talks, panels, and all the other amazing stuff happening this coming month.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye-bye.